agreement variation, is that as a Bendigo staff member, I'm really concerned about the ways that this schedule overrides the change process, which is in the current collective agreement. So it reduces the consultation on major changes, which will affect La Trobe forever, to 5 days, and with the binding decision by an arbitrator, probably someone in Melbourne. And I'm particularly concerned because on the 19th of May, the Vice-Chancellor told staff that although he would not be closing regional campuses, which was welcome, he said things will have to change. The regional campus will not play such an important role in the face-to-face delivery. That's the shift we have to make. Instead, he said, campuses will provide support for students studying online. So as a regional staff member, I'm particularly concerned about this. We know that regional students make up the higher proportion of low SES and Indigenous students, and I know from having taught online for semester 1 that the students that struggle the most with online delivery are students that are, you know, refugee migrant students, non-English speaking background students, students with mental health issues, Indigenous students. So what we have heard, and nothing has been said officially, but we've heard about the imperatives being sent down from the senior executive group about the change to regional teaching, that it looks pretty likely that the shift to online will be will be permanent changes, that instead of just studying online during COVID, that regional students, except in health and education, will be pushed to study online. And I'm extremely concerned about that in terms of student equity and access, but I'm also concerned about what that will mean for regional staff. Because obviously if we have a large number of lectures beamed in at the moment, but if tutorials also become permanently online, you know, how does that affect? It's obviously going to affect jobs because there'll be no longer work to do, but it will particularly affect student experience. So that's one reason why I'm voting no. The other reason is that I'm a single parent, so a 10% wage cut, I'm very privileged to be a continuing staff member and I recognise that. But at the same time, as a single parent, a 10% wage cut, well, it's actually a 13%, 13.2% when you add in the 2 wage rises, means that, you know, it'll affect my family. So either my kid will have to leave the current school that he's at that he loves, or will need to move to cheaper housing and will have to probably axe his music lessons. So they're kind of, it might seem on paper it's just a 10% job cut, but when you're a single parent, it has a dramatic effect. So I guess I'm particularly concerned about the way that the pay cuts are structured. As someone who was 0.5 level A for several years, that, you know, to have the graduated pay cut that we do, but it's still, you know, if it's $70 a week, that's either paying your mortgage or rent or not. Other universities have got a very different pay cut structure. So some universities, for example, are doing, you know, 5%, going up to 10%. Of course, you know, we have a Vice-Chancellor on 980,000. So, you know, cutting his salary to the level of the Prime Minister, you know, 550,000 would seem to be equitable, and certainly cutting the senior executive group, which has just dramatically increased with the current Vice-Chancellor, that, you know, people over 300,000, 400,000, 500,000, you know, could surely take more than a 20% cut, as could the large number of staff in the senior leadership group. So I guess as a kind of in terms of social justice, that if there does need to be pay cuts, it could be a far more graduated thing. You know, people over 500,000 might get a 50% cut. People under, you know, 70,000 might get a 0 cut or whatever. But, you know, there's a better way of doing it than affecting people that are the most affected by staff cuts. Okay, so the change process, pay cuts, the hardship provision, I'm extremely concerned that there's no, although it says that you can appeal, you know, there's nothing about the process, there's nothing about the criteria. The other issue that I'm really concerned about is the leave provisions. So I can be directed to reduce my leave to less than 10 days. So, you know, as a single parent with a school-age child, you know, summer holidays are 6 weeks. I could be directed to take all my leave in November, December before the holidays. So issues like that. Monash University is getting their staff to reduce their rec leave to 4 weeks, which, you know, is a little bit more reasonable, I think. What else? I guess the other options, people say, well, what are the alternatives? So I guess, like Terry, I'd like to talk about what some of the alternatives that I think there are. So obviously the issue of government lobbying for funding the issue of JobKeeper, the issue of La Trobe cost cutting and saving. You know, La Trobe has spent millions of dollars of consultants. When you look at the 2019 annual report, the senior executive group, as I mentioned, has expanded. So some alternatives might be to look at what other cost-cutting savings can occur in areas that aren't staff jobs. And certainly when you look at the reports, it's clear that other universities are making bigger savings in non-staff salary cuts than La Trobe has managed to find so far. Other alternatives would be to consider either the freeze of the pay rise, or for that to be bought out as kind of as other universities are doing, in terms of the option for staff to buy leave, to change the variation of pay cuts so that those on you know, on salaries that are 60, 70, 80,000 or aren't affected to the extent that they are now. Certainly the change process, which I see as probably the worst thing, one of the worst things in this framework, is to exclude, removing, you know, this variation removes all access to the Fair Work Commission and gives all the power to an arbitrator. So certainly to look at some of the ways that savings might be found that doesn't eat into those protections which are in the current enterprise agreement. Obviously, to spell out the issue of the hardship criteria, and also we've had no specifics about which, you know, where are the jobs that are going to be affected from. So as a regional staff member, I feel extremely concerned that even though we know that regional campuses have a very low number of overseas students, that from the VC's imperatives that have gone about cutting regional face-to-face teaching, it looks likely that regional campuses and staff will be paying for that loss in overseas student income, even though our revenue is not significantly decreasing on regional campuses. What else did I want to highlight? I think the other thing is there's been no specific, we've heard at the last All Staff that 12% of jobs, some 225 to 450 jobs, would still be cut, forced redundancies, even if we forgo all our conditions in the current collective agreement about the change process. We also forgo the 10% wage cut, the two 1.6% pay increases. That there's been no specifics about where those jobs are going to go from which campuses, in which portfolios. You know, how many percent of jobs are going to go from regional campuses? What percentage of jobs are going to go from the VC portfolio? There's been no specifics about that at all. And other universities have at least, you know, more clearly specified where some of those forced redundancies might come from. But we have a very kind of loose estimate of where these 225 to 450 jobs are going to come from, along with taking a pay cut. And I guess the other thing is other universities, for example, are doing a pay cut, but they're reducing the fraction at the same time. So staff might take a pay cut, but then they work less hours. But at La Trobe, we're going to take a pay cut and we're going to have more work and we're going to work longer hours.
we used to call a campus is going to change to be, a drop-in centre, basically. No teaching on campus because it'll all be online. That's appalling. And we're not meeting the TESCA standards, and and that's not what the students need. As a sessional academic running tute groups, the students that struggle the most, as you said before, Ruth, lower socioeconomic, we have large number. We have 80% of our students are women, and a large number of them come from refugee or migrant backgrounds, and they are learning, and we have to put in a lot of effort to help them get up to the standards. And that's a whole different issue, but they flounder when they don't have that support, that the support there. And that's it. Why are we just going to be treated like a drop-in centre? I mean, I've got my undergraduate, grad dip, masters, I'm working on my doctorate, all from Shepparton, and that's being taken away.
They're really good questions, Suzanne, and all I can say is I'm sorry. Can I make, there's a question on Slido that I think is really important, and I think it's a good thing for us to focus on. And the question is, the comment is, we need to focus on students, following from Janine's comments. What can we do to make this point? What I suggest, my suggestion and what I'm trying to do is to be as vocal as possible and get it out in public. The Bendigo Advertiser's been pretty good about trying to follow up as much as they can. The ABC has shown some interest, but we got ditched on Friday afternoon. If you can, reach out to your communities, to local council, because local councils benefit from having the universities and they want the universities. Bendigo's local council's strategic plan to 2030 envisages having a university campus, not just La Trobe, with up to 15,000 students. Now, the population of students in Bendigo has been fluctuating around 5,000 since La Trobe took over in 91. So there's some tension there. Trying to get some, I think we need to try and get some traction, and we need to get students to be active. And obviously we need to be really careful. In 2014, our students in particular were very active to the point that they were emailing John Dewar directly, and our head of department was told to stop them. How that was going to happen, I don't know. But if you can get students to be active, and students are worried. Students are contacting us and saying, what's going on? What's going to happen with my course? We've got students stuck in Singapore who can't get back here to complete their courses. And finally, I guess, I'm mindful of the time, that in the union vote that was held last week was the third time the union had voted. The union branch had actually voted no twice. The conduct of that electronic ballot has some serious questions about it in terms of rigour. I won't be surprised if the La Trobe staff vote yes, but I really encourage people to vote no. Don't be prepared to just go along to get along, or to be be frightened by the rhetoric that has been coming out of the senior executive group, that if we don't agree to this, we're going to lose a lot of jobs. We're going to lose jobs anyway. Mm-hmm. And we need to actually show them that we want to do something to hang on to jobs and make regional campuses, as Terry said, autonomous again, perhaps never fully autonomous, but actually vibrant places that they are, that we know they are.
And I'd just like to add to that, Kathleen, before we finish, that one of the things that keeps coming up is, there's no alternatives, but it's really clear from 5,000 Melbourne Uni staff voting against a 2.